California cold. Winter's coming. So I thought today I would talk about building a Buddhist practice. How do you do that? What does it mean to have a practice? And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So the first part of having a practice is a reason to practice. And I think it requires a spark of some kind. You know, why would you want to go practice Buddhism? If you're a Catholic or a Christian or a Jew or Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh, what brings you to Buddhism? And there's always something when you finally decide maybe you want to convert that inspires you to investigate Buddhism. And for me, it was having to die. And of course, you know, I was 28 at the time and realized that I would soon be 30. And I had seen a movie called Logan's Run. And in that movie, when you turned 30, you had a gem in your palm that started to blink. So they would find you. So nobody was over 30. Everybody was sort of gone after 30. And I thought to myself, well, you know, being 30 means you'll probably be dead soon, and it's nice to have a religion so you can die well. But other people come to Buddhism for a variety of reasons. Maybe they wanted an Eastern tradition, maybe it made sense, maybe they liked meditation, maybe they read some books by the Dalai Lama. So there's like all sorts of reasons, but mine was death. And if you watched my Facebook page today, you notice I posted something on composting human beings. That up in the state of Washington, in 2020, they're going to have a funeral service where they compost you. And I thought, what an interesting idea. So you literally go back to the earth, you know, and help the trees grow. So I came to Buddhism, but then how do you start? It's such a big topic. And last week we had a talk with 37 kinds of enlightenment or factors of enlightenment, and you just listening to that talk is enough to intimidate you out of being a Buddhist, because there's so much stuff to learn. And do you have to learn it all? Where do you start? Well, I started with the Dhammapada. And the Dhammapada was a nice ancient text that had been written and translated many times, and even with commentary. And so I read that, and half of it made sense. So I'm going, okay, this is really good. Half of it makes sense. So I only have to work on the other half. And then I found a book by Houston Smith, World Religions, and I read that book, and that confirmed to me that I was on the right path, that Buddhism made the most sense after reading about all the other traditions. And I was not divinely inspired. Nothing really spoke to me in a higher conscious way to be a Buddhist, but it seemed like a practical analysis of the human condition. It seemed to deal with secular humanity. Whether you're an agnostic, an atheist, or a spiritual person, Buddhism seemed to have something to offer. Okay, so how do you start? Well, a lot of people want to find a teacher. That's how they start. They start by looking for a teacher. But you know what? You really don't need to have a teacher when you start. A teacher will tell you what they know. A teacher will tell you what they do. And a good teacher won't tell you what you should do. A good teacher will let you figure that out yourself. But they'll point you in the right direction. You know, and there are a couple different directions you can be pointed in, and they tend to point you in the right direction and say, okay, go for it. Tell me what you find. And I'll either confirm it or not, or I'll just listen intently. And so as you start your path, you might say, well, what would be a good non-teacher? What would teach me other than a person? And the answer to that is simple. If you're a Buddhist, the answer is the 5 precepts. So as a Buddhist, we start our practice practicing the 5 precepts every day. You wake up in the morning and you recite to yourself what the 5 precepts are. So for those who don't know, the first precept is not to take life. Okay, sounds like something good to practice. The second one is not to take what is not given. That should be fairly easy. Third one is no sexual misconduct. That is a little more difficult. Fourth one is not to speak unskillfully. That can be difficult because speech happens so quickly. And the 5th one is not to become intoxicated. And that's really difficult, especially this time of year. Because everybody likes to celebrate and get high, and they say, well, I'm just doing it to be sociable, you know. And there is something to be said for that. But the problem, if you're a practicing Buddhist, is that intoxicants steal your wisdom and make you even dumber than you were before. And you end up doing things that cause you more suffering, and oftentimes people around you more suffering. So the deal is, well, maybe I don't need to drink to the point of intoxication. Maybe I'll start there. You know, I ain't drunk, I just been drinking. Okay, so can you stop at a certain point in your drinking? And if you can do that, that might be the best way for you to start your practice. I will not drink to the point of intoxication. Okay, so the 5 precepts are a reminder that your path as a Buddhist is a path of renunciation. And that is such a positive statement. It means that you already have everything necessary to achieve enlightenment. It's all there. The problem for us is that we have a few roadblocks to get to that place of enlightenment. So we need to get rid of the roadblocks. And 3 of the biggest roadblocks are greed, hatred, and delusion. We need to transform them into generosity, kindness, and wisdom. And that's the idea of this practice, is a transformation, is a cultivation. We plant the seeds and we cultivate them and we give them an environment in which they can grow. And that's our practice, is the environment in which those seeds can grow. So we've taken the 5 precepts and we're doing pretty good, and now our practice needs to be a little bit deeper, and so we accept the challenge of meditation. And meditation is the cultivation of mind. Meditation is designed to allow us to change the way we experience the world. And in our experience of the world, it's often diluted because we have a self, an ego, an I, me, and mine that defines and decides who we are. And that's good. We need that. That's why we go to school. That's why our parents spend 18 or 20 years convincing us to be somebody. And the self, the ego, is a wonderful tool that we can use to reduce our suffering. But it also is a terrible master if it's in charge of us. So the idea of meditation is to sort of get past the master and find the tool, which the ego is really good at. So there are 44 different kinds of meditation. A lot of people are into mindfulness now, because mindfulness can be either secular or it can be religious. But there's also samatha meditation, which is a much bigger chunk of the meditation practice. So samatha meditation is tranquility meditation, it's peace meditation, it's relaxation meditation, and a lot of positive benefits. It's not just strictly insight into the true nature of reality. Oftentimes it's better to have a little peace and tranquility before you finally see what the true nature of reality is. Because the true nature of reality is not necessarily good. I was watching a nature show, and I resist watching the nature shows because I always get depressed when I watch the nature shows. So this was a nature show, and it was about armadillos. And apparently, nobody knows anything about armadillos. So they found one. They put cameras all around and they followed the armadillo, and the armadillo had a little baby armadillo. So they were all so excited. Now they could watch how the mama raises the little baby, and apparently it takes 18 months before the little baby can go out on its own. And then they took more cameras, and the little baby went out on its own and had its own little burrow, and then an animal came by and killed it. And I've been watching this for a half hour, just so excited about life and growing up and getting their own place. And then they're just like wiped out. And that's sort of what life is all about. You know, we grow up and then we get T-boned in the intersection. Bang, gone. All those years of study and work and accumulation, gone in an instant. Is that the true nature of reality? One of them. Absolutely. So sometimes it's nice to have a little tranquility and peace. So when you view the world in a more realistic way, you're not prone to suicide. You just go, wow, you know what? I'm grateful. I'm grateful I'm still here. I'm grateful I can watch football on Sunday. I'm grateful I wasn't T-boned in the intersection on Thanksgiving. Life is okay. So there are ways to deal with the reality that faces us all the time. And that reality is, because we're born, we're going to have to die, and nobody knows when death is going to occur. It could occur any day, any moment. And do you walk through life afraid, or do you walk through life grateful that you're still here? So we meditate, and we go into deep states of focus and concentration. Now, I have found that when I focus in deep states of concentration, that certain information becomes available to me that wasn't available just simply being an intellect. That there's an intuition that happens in meditation, which gives you a much deeper sense of knowledge rather than understanding. Now, I look at knowledge, knowing, as being intuitive, and understanding as being intellectual. So we have both these characteristics available to us, intuition and intellect, and because our ego and our brain and our community encourages us to exercise our intellect and be as smart as we can and go to college for 20 years and have $100,000 in college tuition that we need to pay, we have this giant ego intellect and a really small atrophied intuition. And I think more so with men than with women. I think women have potential for much greater intuition than men do, but given enough time and practice, men can also exercise their intuition too. So what does intuition tell us? It gives us a certain insight without a map, without words. It gives us a feeling, it gives us a knowing, it allows us to see things in a much different way that cannot be put into a normal prose or essay. Therefore, we have haikus and poetry. We have koans. What's the sound of one hand? Clapping. I love that koan. And we can use our intellect to try to decipher that, dissect it, give it meaning, but it really has no meaning. It's simply a whimsical way of saying this is an ultimate reality that you will never understand, but you will be able to experience. So there's a story of the Zen master speaking to the student, and the Zen master says, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" And the student takes off his shoe and puts it on his head. And the Zen master says, "You're right." Wow, what a great story that is. I don't know if anybody knew anything about what was going on, but it seemed to be the right response to the question. And it came from an intuitive place rather than an intellectual place. So our meditation practice is designed to exercise our intuition. It's designed to bring us to the present moment experience of our life, which is the only place we live. It's designed to get rid of all the past and future that gets in the way of that experience. You know, past and future is a heavy burden to carry. You know, we're sort of regretting the past and hoping for a better future. And that really has nothing to do with what we're doing right now. What we're doing right now builds the future. Okay. So we meditate, and the practice that most people think of in America as Buddhism is the practice of meditation. Do you need to practice with other people? No, you don't. Most of the practice you will do will be by yourself, because it's hard to get other people together. Though here in our little Zendo on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday nights, 7:30 to 8:30, we have practice. And people come together, and we sit quietly with each other, and then we all leave. Why would anybody want to do that? Why would anybody want to drive 20 miles, struggle to find parking, so they can sit quietly for an hour and then go back into the world? Why would anybody do that? The power of sitting together is amazing because it encourages you to sit longer and to sit better. There's a certain competition. I just posted something, Zen competition, on my Facebook page, and a bunch of people sitting in meditation, and behind them is the crowd cheering them on. Yay! So sometimes meditation feels like that, you know? Only 10 more minutes till the gong rings. We can do it. We can do it. But when you're sitting alone, that's the discipline that's necessary, to get up in the morning or to stay up later in the evening and to sit down and actually meditate. Now, is there good meditation? No, there's not good meditation. Is there a good meditator? No, there's not a good meditator. One person defined a good meditator as one who meditates. So if you're meditating, you're a good meditator. Will it be consistent? It will not be consistent. Will it get better and then get worse? And then get better and then get worse? Absolutely, all the time. And if it gets better, that gives you a false sense of success. If it gets worse, that means you're not doing it right. But there's no right way to do it. It's simply to do it. And there's 44 different kinds of ways of doing it. So don't defeat yourself in thinking that you're going to go from point A to point B. It's not linear. Every day, every time you sit down and meditate is the first time. And that's what you start to learn in your meditation practice. That you had Wednesday was good, Friday was not so good, I wonder what's going to happen Sunday. Well, who shows up for meditation on Sunday? Is it the same one that showed up on Wednesday? No. The same one that showed up on Friday? No. So Sunday is a unique individual who's never meditated before, but somehow they know where to go and what to do. Cool. Okay, so you sit, and then after you sit, you get up and you continue your life. And what happens is a slow and subtle transformation of the way you live your life. Other people may sense that there's something different about you, but they can't quite pinpoint it. They might ask you, did you get a haircut? No. Oh, is those new shoes you have on? No. Well, what's different about you? I meditate. And then they walk away. So something happens to you. But it's so subtle, you're not going to be able to see it. Other people may sense it, but not be able to define it. And that's the deal. You want to create a momentum in your practice. You want it to carry you even when you're not practicing. That's how strong the practice can be. So even though you're not practicing, practice happens. And why is that important? Because one day you'll be sitting or lying in a bed waiting to die and get composted, and your practice will still continue. And then your brain will start to fall apart because there's not enough energy to keep consciousness together, and you'll still practice. And then you'll be ready to take your last breath, And you may be aware of the last breath you take in this lifetime and the first breath you take in the next lifetime. All because you have a practice. All because you've created momentum that allows the practice to happen all by itself. Now, you may not agree with that, but anybody that plays a musical instrument will get the idea of what I'm talking about. Because the idea of playing a musical instrument is it takes practice to begin with. When I started playing the harmonica, I really wanted to learn how to play it. And I bought a book and an audio cassette in the 1980s called Blues Harmonica for the Musical Idiot. And I thought, I can learn to play the harmonica with this book because I'm a musical idiot. So I sat down and I practiced, and it never sounded like I wanted it to sound. It sounded, I wanted to be like some of the great harmonica players, like Sonny Boy Williamson, #1 or even #2, James Cotton, Charlie Musselwhite. I wanted to be some of those people. I wanted to sound like them because I loved their sound, and I could never make it sound like that. Other musicians can make their instruments sound like other people, but I couldn't do it. And then about 2 years into my practice, one day it turned into performance. And I could play the blues. But it didn't sound like any of the people I wanted to play. It sounded like me. And I thought to myself, wow, it sounds like me. After 2 years of practice, I had one moment of performance. And that changed my life. That went from faith that I could do it into confidence that I did it. And after that moment, I got a little bit better and a little bit better because I played it the way I wanted. I ended up playing it. Our Buddhist practice is exactly like that. We might want to be like Jack Kornfield or the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh. We're going to practice just like them. But they got different karma than we do. We have our own special karma. We have our own special way of practicing. And the idea is to use them and then find your place. You can see it can be done. There's proof it can be done because of them. But now you got to find your practice. You got to find your understanding of Buddhism. You're going to find your knowing of Buddhism, your intuition about the Buddhism that will become you ultimately. Now, there have been stories of Buddhists who've been practicing a really long time and turned out to be relatively unskillful, especially when it came to sexual misconduct. And you say, how could that be? How could somebody that's practiced Buddhism 20 years be so unskillful when it comes to their sex and sexual misconduct? And the answer is really simple. The answer is human first, Buddhist second, until enlightenment. So you're going to be human first. That's how you came into the world. That's most likely how you're going to exit the world. But if you achieve nirvana, you will never be able to indulge in sexual misconduct or any kind of sexual conduct. You will not be able to go into the stock market and cheat. You will not be able to lie as a politician. There's a lot of things you won't be able to do anymore. So you're probably going to want to become a monk or a nun so you can support yourself. Because nobody's going to hire you if you're too good and too pure. So here we have the 5 precepts, the foundation of our practice. Now we have meditation, changing the way we look at the world, changing our mind. And now we come to the wisdom aspect. And the wisdom aspect is twofold. Number one, I have found there's a lot of wisdom in reading. We are so lucky in 2019 to have such a large variety of books on Buddhism. And some of the best teachers that have ever walked the earth have left behind their path, their understanding, their intuitive knowledge in these pages. And if you have a Kindle, you can go on Amazon.com any night and download some of the best books ever written. But then you got to read them. So I've got a pile of books to be read, a pile of books I have read, and a pile of books I am reading. And that's been my life. I like reading books. I learn so much more in reading a book because I can go back. I can get definitions. If somebody's giving a live presentation and I don't know what they're talking about, I'm a little embarrassed to stop them in the middle of their talk and say, what do you mean by that? But in a book, especially on a Kindle, if you just hold your finger on the word, the definition comes up. How cool is that? And that allows me to have some of the regular wisdom necessary to understand, and my practice gives me some of the intuitive wisdom that's necessary for me to know, and between the intellectual and the knowing, my practice deepens. And the idea, I think, for me was I had a real difficult time in the beginning because I could understand to a great extent what was being said. But when I tried to say it, I would always come to a fork in the road where I couldn't go any further. And I go, man, I had it up to that point, but I couldn't go any further. I guess I got to read some more books. I got to sit down and meditate some more. And eventually the fork in the road got further and further away. And now they can't shut me up. There's no fork in the road. I just keep talking and talking and talking. Some people say, wow, you really said a lot about nothing. I go, thank you very much. It's hard to talk about nothing well. But when you get into Zen and some of the Mahayana sutras, what the hell are they talking about? Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Are you kidding me? One is intuitive, one is intellectual. Okay, I got that. Form, emptiness, you know. So it takes a long time, but we shouldn't be deceived that we're failing if we don't understand everything, because the point is not to understand everything. That just gets in the way. You're going to have to get rid of most of your understanding anyway, once you get to a certain point, because that limits you. This goes beyond understanding. This goes beyond anything that you've experienced intellectually. This is a door into the infinite, a portal. There is no end, and there is no beginning, and it's always been here. This is what the Buddhas have been talking about, all 28 of them. It's always been here. But not everybody has had the time to investigate. That families, work, vacations, Thanksgiving, it takes up a lot of time, you know? You got the monk who's sitting in the cave thinking and meditating and reading ancient discourses. He may have the time but may not have the understanding. And if he has the understanding, he may not have the intuition. He may not have the knowing. In one moment it all comes together. And then you're said to be enlightened. But what does that mean? It doesn't mean you stop doing the same stuff you've always done. It means now you're doing the same stuff in a different way. There's no greed attached to it. There's no hatred attached to it. There's no delusion or ignorance attached to it. You're doing it in a pure way. You're doing it in a way that will benefit other sentient beings and reduce their suffering, and now your suffering has been ended forever. So the practice is probably the most important part, because if you just simply focus on the destination, you'll never get there. What we need to do is create conditions necessary for the destination to appear. Because it's right here, right now. We never have to go any place for nirvana. Though I know a lot of people like to go to India and join an ashram and be vegetarians and wear white, because that's a quicker way to get enlightened. But you could stay in Koreatown and eat kimchi and still get enlightened. It still works, because it's inside, it's not outside. It's the transformation of consciousness, it's not the transformation of body or place. So our practice needs to be focused, I shouldn't say needs, our practice could be focused on creating the necessary conditions for nirvana to occur. And some of those necessary conditions are the 5 precepts, meditation, and wisdom, insight into the true nature. And I'm going to stop there and ask if anybody has any comments or questions about what I've said. Isaac, do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Good to see you all.
Good to see you, Isaac.
Several questions came to my mind, but I'm concerned about you said that it's kind of disappeared from my mind. The question now is confusing. Regarding the to approach nirvana, you said that we can meditate, and as a matter that through Buddhism we can get to nirvana. But beside this, also the point that we encounter the death is going to help us to make the transition.
The practice will help us to die.
To die.
Yes.
And also now that it came to my question is that when you get when you understand, when people start understanding that the best way to walk this life is with their gift, understanding that most of the people work for money, but they don't work because of enjoyment or doing because of their gift. When you start realizing what are your gifts, what are you good for, how you start fight it up, if you know that you are a good carpenter, but you are doing another thing, how you can warm it up, your gift, or at least if you have the notion, what is your gift, how start to warm it up?
Okay, I think I know what you said. And I would suggest a book, Dwayne Elgin, Voluntary Simplicity. It's about finding your way in life. And there are wonderful stories, one of them being a lawyer who was very successful and worked very hard and realized he wasn't doing what he wanted to do. He wanted to be a carpenter. And he gave up his law practice to become a carpenter. And he was a very good carpenter, but he made nowhere near as much money as being a lawyer. And yet it was okay, because when you do something you like, you never have to work again in your life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hi.
Thank you for your talk. You said something along the lines of eventually we find our own style of Buddhism. Like we don't become our teachers, we kind of develop our own. How do we guard against making our practice kind of self-serving, right? As opposed to challenging ourselves to, get rid of greed, anger, delusion. We just kind of develop like an easy Buddhism path, right? And we do some kind of practice, blah blah blah. But this is like my Buddhism. Like how do we? They seem like extremes, right? Where you actually get on some path to reach nirvana, and and the other extreme is where it's just kind of, easy for you, and you don't really do very much. Like, how do you avoid that? And say, well, it's my own style.
Yeah, well, I love the way you said self-serving, because it'll be self-serving until the end. Self is in charge. And it can be easy. If you find your way, it may be harder. If you find somebody else's way, it may be easier. So sometimes it's too easy if you're trying to be somebody else. Sometimes it's a little more difficult. And I don't think there's any way you can just say, I'm not going to be greedy anymore. The idea is to see through the greed and see that it leads to more suffering rather than less. And so the conditions necessary would be a deeper understanding, not necessarily an intuitive knowing. That, okay, I'm prone to want more than I should take. So maybe if somebody offers me a piece of chocolate cake, I should just have half of it as a way of practicing non-greed. Or if somebody says, let's go out to eat at a buffet, all you can eat for $14.99. And instead of giving 3 plates of food, you could get a half a plate of food. Okay, so there are ways to practice to do it, but if you directly go at it and say, I'm not going to be greedy anymore, I'm not going to be deluded anymore, I don't think we can do that, because it's like the ear hearing itself and the eye seeing it yourself. It's like you're telling self not to do what it's always done. And we need to sort of trick the self into thinking there are other ways to do it, better ways to do it. So it's a subtle game that we play. But ultimately it works out to our advantage. Ultimately we do lose the greed, hatred, and delusion. But it's not an easy process, and it takes quite a while. And you may not even realize that you're succeeding. You know, you're eating less, you quit smoking, you don't drink beer anymore. Only because you didn't want to drink beer anymore, and you didn't want to smoke anymore because your clothes always smelled bad. So you might give other reasons to why you're doing what you're doing. But ultimately it could stem from the practice that you've decided to take on. And now the subtle changes are happening, but not for the reasons you think they should happen. But they still happen. And you can't take credit for it, and that's when it really works. If you can take credit for it, then something's wrong, because that's self-serving.